MLRC. I want to introduce myself. My name is Mariana Castro, and I'm the Qualitative Director of the Multilingual Learning Center, and we have other amazing staff with us from the MLRC. But I also want to introduce our panel. And first, we have Megan Madigan Peercy, and Dr. Madigan Peercy is professor and special assistant to the provost at the University of Maryland. Her research examines pedagogies of teacher education and the preparation and development of teachers throughout their careers as they work with linguistically and culturally diverse learners. She has been awarded multiple grants, and she has written papers across many prestigious journals. One thing that I want to highlight is that she's deeply invested in understanding the ways in which practice and theory can be in dialogue. So I'm very excited to welcome her. We also have Johanna Tigert, who is a senior lecturer of education at the Roma Department of Teacher Education at the University of Turku in Finland. And Dr. Tigert also earned her PhD in applied linguistics right here in the US at the University of Maryland. I heard her talk about her research last year at ARA, and I was impressed by her curiosity in examining teacher support across content areas to teach multilingual students in culturally sustaining and humanizing ways. I also want to welcome Daisy Fredricks, who is the director of the teacher education and an associate professor of teaching and learning in the College of Education and Community Innovation at Grand Valley State University. She served as an elementary and middle school classroom teacher in Michigan, in Texas, and in Arizona. So her own life experiences are at that intersection of practice and theory. Her current research focuses on humanizing pedagogies and core practices for teaching multilingual learners in pre-K-12 classrooms. And we also welcome Mel Hardy-Skibertis, who is a soon-to-be defending PhD candidate at the University of Maryland, College Park, in the Department of Teaching and Learning, Policy and Leadership. She has a double specialization in teacher education and professional development, and in applied linguistics and literacy education. And she's one of our upcoming and future change agents in the ways in which we prepare our teachers to work with multilingual learners. So we're very thankful, and we thank each of and one of you for sharing your work with us today.
Thank you. Should we go ahead and take over, Mariana? Is it time for that?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Let's get our slides shared, and then I'll get started. Well, while Mel's working on that, I'll just say thank you so much for the gracious introduction, Mariana, and for the invitation to be a part of this webinar series. We're so pleased to be able to contribute to the great things that you all have going on at the MLRC, and we're glad that everyone here today is joining us for our presentation entitled Leveraging Core Practices to Support Teachers Humanizing Pedagogy with Multilingual Learners. I'm Megan Madigan Peercy, and let me just share a bit with you about what we'll be doing in our hour together today. Next slide, please. So in just a moment, we'll introduce you to some of the teachers who have been really important collaborators on this project. We'll share a brief overview of the 6 core practices that we've identified and developed in collaboration with early career teachers that are important to their success in teaching multilingual students, as well as sharing some insights about the foundations for our work in terms of the research processes we've been engaged in. We'll describe what we mean by humanizing, since that's an important part of the core practices that we've developed, and it really underpins both our scholarly and our practical work associated with this. We'll focus in on a dimension of one of the 6 core practices that our team has identified, a practice that's central to the work that we all do in our field, which is scaffolding. And we'll look at a brief example from one of our video clips on the YouTube channel that we've created associated with this work. We'll also examine together how scaffolding practices are humanizing, and we'll share some things about where we're headed with this work and some resources as well. Next slide. Great, thank you. So you heard a little bit about us already, but let me tell you a little bit about the teachers whose photos you see going from left to right on the bottom of your screen there. On the far left is Melissa, who's a secondary ESOL English language arts teacher, often teaching 9th and 10th graders English language arts. Kendall is an elementary ESOL teacher, often teaching the younger grades in elementary school. TC in the middle is a secondary ESOL science teacher and often teaches students who are designated as multilingual learners with English proficiency as newcomers and beginning level. Erica is an elementary ESOL teacher, and she often teaches the younger grades of elementary school students. And Andrea on the far right is an elementary ESOL teacher who's often teaching the upper grades in elementary school. Okay, next slide, please. Here's just a little insight into our team in action. You can see us both working in our research team time together, as well as some of the teachers working in their classrooms as we work together in this longitudinal and design-based project. Next slide, please. So this work comes from our collaboration with a group of 13 early career teachers and 10 teacher educators, and we worked together over 7 years. You can see that we've got our data collection process was mostly focused between 2015 and 2022. Our initial focus on this work was for all of us to work together on identifying core practices for teaching multilingual students. And where we're heading now in terms of what we're doing with the data set and our next steps include looking at and thinking about how to develop teachers' humanizing practice, how to use those core practices to develop teachers' humanizing practice. And you can see on the right side some of the different data sources that we've drawn from over time to help inform this work. So let's move on to the next slide. And this gives you a little bit of insight into some of the different kind of fruits of our labor from the work together. On the far right, you see the 6 core practices that we've developed, which we'll be saying more about and elaborating on as we move through our time together today. And then on the left, you see that's a screenshot from our YouTube channel that we'll be showing you a clip from. And Mel will be talking some more about those related resources. So I'm going to pass it on to her and she'll share some of the foundational materials and concepts behind this presentation.
All right. So if you scan the QR code on the screen or go to that short link, or that link will be dropped in the chat in just a moment, that link will take you to the website for the book that we're going to be sharing some things from. The cover of the book is there on the screen. And I also have my copy literally right here because I was using it earlier today. Not promotional, literally actually just using it. And so in that book, we highlight 6 practices that our group identified as foundational for new teachers of multilingual students to be able to do their work equitably and successfully. And we share some examples from their classrooms. And then we also have our YouTube channel as mentioned. So again, this QR code goes there, that short link goes there, and we'll have a little bundle of all our resources available towards the end as well. So we have this YouTube channel that's part of a set of resources. The YouTube channel, it has 23 videos, soon to have a couple of more videos that we're just getting ready to upload that highlight different practices and the ways that our teacher colleagues engaged in these practices and the ways that they think about those practices. So we're just about to add 2 more additional classroom vignette videos, one for elementary and one for secondary classrooms to explore multiple core practices across a single lesson. The video clips also offer questions for reflection and key ideas, and you'll be seeing some of those along with us today. The videos can be used alongside the book or as a standalone resource. So what do we mean by humanizing pedagogy? So if you could just take a moment, you can look at our beautiful graphic, and put in the chat what do you define as humanizing pedagogy, or what is your definition for humanizing pedagogy? And we'll give you a moment to think and see what interesting definitions come out before we share our own definition. No pressure. So you've got teaching the whole student, considering the student as an individual, not just teaching the curriculum, understanding and seeing the student as a whole. Humanizing pedagogy is when you really consider each student as individual learners, with their potential and their weaknesses, recognizing each student's rich complex and their intersectional identities. These are all lovely. Wrapping teaching practices around the students so that they are at the heart of the learning process, both the content and the learning process. So I'm going to move forward, but you can feel free to, especially if you're still typing, to keep putting these in. These are really excellent to see. So our use of humanizing pedagogy is grounded in the 8 tenets established by Salazar 2010. The 8 tenets, which we've summarized here on the screen, center students and the values of an authentic, meaningful, respectful, and culturally sustaining classroom. So a lot of the really similar things that were appearing in your personal definition. So maybe some of you are already familiar with this work. It sounds like some of you are. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Daisy, who is going to briefly describe our 6 core practices.
All right, thank you very much, Mel. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so our first core practice, knowing students, reflects on and reinforces the importance of teachers truly and deeply knowing who their learners are. We all know that knowing who students are is fundamentally important for planning and delivering responsive instruction and assessment, and also for humanizing practice. So with multilingual learners in mind, it is important that teachers also know about their students' backgrounds and experiences, particularly in the following areas. And we've identified home language and literacy, English language and literacy, prior schooling experiences, in and out of school interests, as well as their experiences at home and in the community. And we'll go with the next slide, please. The learning environment refers to how teachers can build and sustain positive learning environments within their classroom, and why this is important specifically for multilingual learners. So this core practice centers around the intentional teaching of procedures so that consistent routines can be developed, setting and holding our learners to high expectations, tending to the instruction and support of social emotional learning, and using culturally and linguistically responsive and sustaining pedagogies. Next slide, please. Content and language instruction, we know, are also very critical components of daily classroom instruction that all teachers must also consider. So within this core practice, we highlight the following concepts. We have comprehensible input, scaffolding, differentiation, and content and language instruction. And we found that our pre-service teachers often had a very surface level understanding of these concepts, but did not really understand what they looked like in practice. So this core practice provides guidance on these 4 dimensions of content and language instruction so that teachers can plan and enact effective instruction and assessment that's going to support the presentation of information in ways that are very meaningful, rigorous, engaging, and most importantly, appropriate for multilingual students. And we'll go with the next slide, please, Mel. We also consider how teachers can support language and literacy development. So we know that language and literacy are foundational building blocks for learning in school, and that our multilingual learners bring a wealth of linguistic resources and a range of literacy abilities. Teachers need to know how to access and leverage these important resources. So we focus on the following practices: promoting vocabulary development, using students' home languages as a resource, attending to both receptive, or the listening and reading, and productive, or the speaking and writing language use through words, sentences, and more extended discourse. And finally, adapting instruction based on the complexity of language. Next slide. All right. So we recognize the importance of assessment, especially for multilingual learners, as they frequently engage with tests that assess English language proficiency, content knowledge, and literacy ability. So within this core practice, we offer 3 considerations for teachers so that they can develop and enact meaningful assessments. And they include how to develop and use informal and formal assessments appropriately. And we put a spotlight on aligning assessment to content and language objectives, interpreting the results of standardized tests, including English language proficiency tests, and having the ability to differentiate formal and informal assessments so that they're appropriate for multilingual learners' language development as well as their content knowledge. And we'll go to the final slide. So our final core practice focuses on different ways we can develop positive relationships with stakeholders, all of the stakeholders who support the range of needs of our multilingual learners. We focus on collaborating with colleagues, making meaningful connections with families, engaging in advocacy with a range of stakeholders like your administrators, policymakers in the community, and also practicing teacher self-care, because this is a particularly demanding field within education. We do believe that when we look at all of these practices collectively, that these core practices can support the learning and the success of our multilingual learners, and they can also promote more humanizing pedagogies and practices in schools. So now I'm going to turn it over to Johanna, who's going to present an example of what a core practice looks like in practice.
Thanks, Daisy. So as you could probably see from the slides that Daisy walked us through, you could write a whole book about these. Oh, wait, we did. But for the purposes of this presentation, we'll highlight our core practice work with just one example dimension from one of the core practices. The core practice we've chosen to highlight today is content and language instruction. And we're going to also take a look at what humanizing pedagogy looks like in the context of this core practice. When we developed this core practice, the distinct elements we identified were comprehensible input, scaffolding, differentiation, and integrated content and language objectives. Next, please, Mel. So scaffolding is what we're going to focus on. And we'll show you an example of scaffolding in a little bit from our video library available on YouTube. And we'll also discuss how scaffolding relates to humanizing pedagogies. So scaffolding, go ahead and go to the next one. Just to briefly introduce how we think about scaffolding, our definition, no surprise there, probably we drew on Vygotsky's work, where scaffolding is understood as a process where learners can do something on their own after being given appropriate support or that scaffolding to build their understanding. We also think about scaffolding as both pre-planned and in the moment temporary support provided by a more capable or knowledgeable person who is often the teacher but can also be a peer. So in order to move from scaffolding as just a theoretical concept into scaffolding as a practice, here are some concrete ways to scaffold in the classroom. So for example, you might provide guided notes in the form of an organizer with some parts such as keywords already filled in for the students, depending on their proficiency. You might preview and interact, have students preview and interact with key vocabulary before engaging with content that uses that new vocabulary. You could also provide sentence starters or frames or word bank, and these can also be differentiated. Or you could share models or examples of what a final product looks like for the students. So next, we're going to show you an example of the kind of a classroom video that our YouTube channel contains. So you'll get a little taste. And this type of video also served as data for a project. We're going to take a look at Erica, who again was an elementary ESOL teacher. And we're going to dig into how she scaffolds her instruction for multilingual students. We're going to watch the clip now.
Who is first? Okay, Brianna is first. Solo Brianna. Who is this? Mechanic. Mechanic. Okay, Brianna. ¿Cuál? He or she or they? He. Okay.
He is the mechanic.
Good. He is a mechanic. Let me move this over a little bit. He is a mechanic. Okay. All right, Lauren, come up.
He's the teacher. Lauren teacher.
Maestra.
Sit.
This one? Okay, students, listen.
Okay.
This is the student. Lo siento. This is the student. You are the maestros. Okay, maestros, listen
Okay.
and say yes or no.
No.
Okay.
She is a police officer. Yes.
Oh, thank you. You can sit down, Lauren. Brianna.
Thanks, Mel. And I have to note the video and the sound were out of sync, at least for me, but that's just Zoom for you. So they're perfectly in sync on YouTube. So how is scaffolding humanizing? Let's go back to that concept. We believe scaffolding is humanizing because it decreases inequity by addressing academic and linguistic differences between English dominant students and multilingual students. And it also helps students meaningfully participate in instruction. So here again are those foundational elements of humanizing pedagogy that we drew on as we worked on this project from Salazar. When we think about what we just saw Erica doing on the video, We saw her scaffolding her students' learning by providing peer support, combining oral and written language to teach key vocabulary, and using pictorial supports and sentence frames. But we also see some of these tenets of humanizing pedagogy in this lesson. In particular, we see her valuing the assets and resources students bring to the classroom. So it's not on this video clip, but this lesson builds on work where she and the students discussed jobs that their parents had or that they wanted to have as grown-ups. So it built on those the knowledge that they brought to the classroom. She also involves students as active participants in their own learning. So she has them step up to work with the vocabulary, and she also has them take on the roles of maestros. And she also provides academically rigorous and meaningful instruction. So she's combining content and language. Students practice personal pronouns in the lesson as well as the content vocabulary. So next, Megan will describe our next steps in this project.
Thanks, Johanna. Let's see, Mel, there we go. So, we're working from this understanding of humanizing practices to think about how to develop humanizing pedagogy in teachers who come from all kinds of different backgrounds and contexts. And so the question that we're asking is the one that you see on the slide here. How do the core practices for teaching multilingual learners that we've developed support the humanizing pedagogy of a wide range of educators? Next slide, please. And we think that a foundation for humanizing pedagogy is developing what we're calling teachers' humanizing understandings, or what you see here as HUs. And here's what they are here. Understanding one's own self, the teacher self as a sociocultural being, which also then helps us and our teachers to understand their students as sociocultural beings, thinking about the different intersectional identities that we all bring to the classroom. And that was something that was mentioned in the chat earlier, I know. Holding an asset-based mindset is another one. Really believing in the impact of a positive and rigorous learning environment, using instruction that leverages students' culture and language, centering students as active knowers and participants, holding a critical perspective, and having an inclination to collaborate and engage with stakeholders. We're arguing that these humanizing understandings are all important foundations to developing teachers' humanizing practice. And we've worked on how these map to our core practices and to the tenets of humanizing pedagogy from Salazar that we've been outlining throughout the presentation. So, and in fact, we'll be talking more about how we're working on these humanizing understandings and thinking about how to develop them in teachers in the November webinar. So there's a teaser for that if you want to see a little bit more about how we're moving this into practice through the humanizing understandings. That'll be something we'll be looking at, as well as showing at least one other example from our video resources and talking about how we're integrating these humanizing understandings into our multilingual learner methods coursework. So some of the really moving it to practice with pre-service and in-service educators kinds of questions. So let's go to the next slide. And I just want to share, this is an additional resource to support the work that you might be doing in terms of professional development for educators. This is a website that has a number of additional materials on it, and you can use either the QR code there or the link that Mel just put in the chat. And that, if you go to that website, you can see the tab there for resources, and then the screenshot on the right is just showing you that underneath the graphic, you've got a link for tables and graphics, for classroom resources, video resources, and some other links there as well. That's where we'll be adding some of those additional video materials also that Mel was mentioning. And we've got like different templates there that you can use to support watching the videos and looking for core practices and humanizing pedagogy in the examples there. And so then let's go to the next slide. I think this is our last one. And in the little thank you box there, you've got a link to a folder where we've collected a lot of these resources in one place. If you want to use that, it's got also a lot of our scholarly work related to the project, including some of our other articles and book chapters related to the data set that we've been working with for quite a while now. And we also just want to say thank you very much for your interest and your time. And I think we're ready to open it up for questions and conversation at this point.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask if